Looking for a place to speak your truth? This podcast is on an endless pursuit to build through entrepreneurship, empowerment, and creativity. Through thought-provoking content and a fearlessness to dive into untouched topics with an undeniable dedication to highlighting others who are often overlooked. This is Deep Conversations.
Stay tuned for Deep Conversation Podcast.
Welcome to Deep Conversations Podcast, everybody. I am your host, and today I am blessed to be here with a guest of mine who is doing a lot of good things. He's an ordained minister with over 20 years of church and nonprofit leadership. He's the president and the CEO of the building Up Our Youth Foundation. I'm here with Reverend Dr. Jon Robinson. Now today, Rev, today's Earth Day, especially Earth Day. So what should we be focused on during a day like this?
Well, quite frankly, we should be focused on making sure that the planet does not expel us as the virus that we are. In this work, there's a lot of concern about the viability of the planet. And what I would say is that the planet will be fine. The question is, will we be here to enjoy the planet? Because like a typical virus or a parasite, humanity has inflicted its will upon the planet. We are consuming more resources than the planet is able to replenish. We have been horrible stewards over this earth and over creation. And so what we should be focused on is making sure that we do the things that are necessary to sustain life on this planet, and that we don't get rejected by our host as a virus or a parasite, typically does get rejected. So on Earth Day, it's a great opportunity for us to sort of reset and think about the kind of planet we want for our children and grandchildren and our grandchildren's children to have when we are long gone. And I think the unfortunate part of the last 100 or so years is that we've made decisions for some short-term benefits that have some long-term tragic and devastating consequences. So this is a day to sort of reset and to prioritize our own lives in a way that is sustainable, that is renewable, and that ensures that our children and grandchildren and further generations have something that we can pass on to them in the form of an inheritance.
So why do you think, we know, but we just choose not to pay attention to what's going on? Because, a lot of times, they say sin has a tendency to feel good. You know what I mean? A lot of things that don't feel good, or that feel good, are usually not good for you. So do you think, that we're just we'd rather just sit in our stink than to really focus on, what the necessary plans are?
Part of it. I have a friend who is fond of saying that wherever two or three are gathered, there will be politics. And so unfortunately, we live in a culture that politicizes everything. Even science is politicized. Facts have become politicized. And so it's not that we don't know, it's that we have politicized climate, we have politicized the environment, so that you have to pick sides when the reality is that the consequences of our decisions are impacting everyone. Some of us, like the communities where you and I are from, communities where we still have families, communities where we live, are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. And so it's not that we don't know, it's that the issues become politicized. And then the further challenge, I think, is that in America and in other Western cultures, we have become obsessed with symbolic gestures. We love symbolism. right? We like to check a box that makes us feel good, and then we can file that away until the next time. So we see it with Earth Day, we see it with Martin Luther King's Day, we see it with Juneteenth, any sort of day, even with Black History Month, Women's History Month. Because we like symbolism, and because we tend to shy away from substantive and structural transformation, we box ourselves into some corners. And so that's I think the other part of the challenge. With Dr. King Day as an example, we got a federal mandate to honor and commemorate his birthday, but we don't have a federal mandate to expand access to early childhood education or expanded access to Medicare and Medicaid. Two things that Dr. King was very passionate about, right? So we celebrate his birthday without paying any attention to the stuff that he cared about.
Yep.
Right. Juneteenth, and it's another example. It's a federally mandated holiday. Everybody's got to take off. Federal government is shut down on Juneteenth, but we can't get a Voting Rights Act. We can't get voting protections, which is one of the fundamental rights that Juneteenth ushered in. So that's part of the challenge. Earth Day is similar in that regard. So my issue is not necessarily with Earth Day or King Day. It's with our obsession with the symbolic. Because we can commemorate Earth Day, but then we have no federal mandate that corporations are net zero by 2040, right? We've got a system where corporations can opt in to being net zero. Well, that's just the baseline of what we should be doing in order to ensure that we have a sustainable planet. So as long as we are fascinated by and enthralled with the symbolic, we're going to struggle with the substantive and the transformative change that we need.
So why would you say there isn't enough urgency around something as big and destructive to all of us as a climate crisis?
Because we have a political system that's based on special interests, and oil and gas industries and other fossil fuel industries are paying obscene amounts of money to influence legislators and policymakers to pass legislation that's favorable to those industries, right? So that we're continuing to drill for oil, even though the environmental and economic impact has been demonstrated to be adverse. We're expanding pipelines, and we're engaged in fracking and all of these policies that are being funded by industries that have a lot of money and have a lot of influence. And so our political system is based not necessarily on morality, not on ethics, but on special interests. And I think that will help to deaden the urgency where it matters, which is in public policy.
Now, when you talk about the climate crisis and the environmental injustice of the population, as I read, ecological apartheid. What does that mean?
So, how much time we got? If you look at South African apartheid, right, it started in the 1940s and officially ended, or was abolished in 1994. The main difference between the South African apartheid and Jim Crow segregation in the American South is that at least the South Africans were honest. So we have a system of political, economic, educational disenfranchisement based purely on race, where the government enacted and enforced policies of segregation, forced segregation based upon race. Black South Africans, who were the majority and still are the majority population in South Africa, were told where they could live, told where they could go to school, told what to learn, which is identical to what was happening in America during the same period of time. The only difference is America perpetuated this lie that we were separate and equal, separate but equal, right? So that language was used to say that segregation was not bad because we had the black and white races had equality, which was a lie, right? There was never equality. There was never equity educationally, economically, politically. So that when we look at the public policy decisions that were made in South Africa to maintain strict segregation, the same thing has happened in America, where realtors, banks, insurance companies, mortgage companies pulled maps, literally pulled maps out and drew red lines around the places on the map where Black folk can live. Mm-hmm. Right? Which is bad enough. That's insidious. That's racist enough. But then public policy was based on the lines drawn on the map. So decisions about where to put parks and tree cover and other green spaces were based purely on the red line maps. So that Black neighborhoods did not get investment in trees and did not get investment in parks, did not get investment, economic investment and other forms of investment, infrastructure investment. So all of the elements that characterize South African apartheid really are present in the American South and really all over the country, because redlining and racial covenants and those types of public policy initiatives were not just relegated to the American South. It happened all over America. And it's very similar to what happened in South Africa. And so I think the path, so I'll end there, but I think the parallels are clear, right? Historically, politically, economically. And so what's happening with the climate is eerily reminiscent of that, because not only were decisions about where to make investments, but also decisions about where to place landfills and trash incineration sites and lead pipe infrastructure. It's 2024, 10 years since the expose on what was going on in Flint, what is still going on in Flint, Michigan, right, with the lead pipes. So it's been 10 years since that was exposed, but lead pipes were not built in 2014. That goes back to the 1910s and 1920s. And so the infrastructure, even the types of paint and the types of pipes that were put in the built environment, all of that, the legacy of environmental racism is very reminiscent of what happened in apartheid South Africa.
And I'm glad, it's interesting, that the way you were saying that, because I remember in school for me, I'll be 40 soon. So in school for me growing up, I never really enjoyed reading. I don't know if it was because of it wasn't like I wasn't interested in it, but I guess the school surrounding, and just how the public school systems, I can't really explain it, but it doesn't breed anything in you to want to achieve. I don't want to say achieve, but it's different. And when I got out of high school, it's all I do now. That's my pastime is reading, and I study and I read a lot of our history. And just what you were saying of the infrastructures and the redlining, the first thing that I read when I started reading was, I can't remember the name of the book, but in the book they were talking about how they used to build bridges low enough so the people who rode the buses in our neighborhoods couldn't get out to those beaches where, white folks and stuff were. And that was a strategic, like you said, that's just not racist enough. It goes to show, and it's still, like you said, it's 2024, and these things are still just as, if not more now, because of social media and because of the things, the technology and stuff that we see. So how would you go ahead?
So I'm working with, and I'll get to sort of explaining what I do in my day job later on. Hopefully we get a chance to talk about the Smart Surfaces project and the Cities for Smart Surfaces initiative that we're working on. But I'm working in Jacksonville and New Orleans and Dallas and San Antonio, Atlanta, cities across the South that are dealing with, even in 2024, the implications and the repercussions of public policy decisions that were made 100, 150 years ago.
Wow.
So one of the neighborhoods that I've been supporting, so one of the things we do is to provide grant funding to community-based organizations and nonprofits and churches to develop place-based climate mitigation projects in their community. So there's a neighborhood in Jacksonville along the Ribault River, which there in the 1910s, the city of Jacksonville built trash incineration sites across the city. And so all the trash was collected, and they took it to the incineration site and burned all the trash 2, 3, 4 times a week. So polluting the air, polluting the water, polluting the soil. In the 1920s, they built a neighborhood along the Ribault River, and they used the toxic ash from the trash incinerator as the filler for the foundation that the houses were built on.
And most don't know this.
No, people don't know that. Well, people who live in the neighborhood know that.
Yeah.
And then they redlined Black folk into that neighborhood. You have Black folk in Jacksonville, and Black folk in New Orleans, Black folk in coast to coast, north to south, who are living in neighborhoods where there is still the remnants of sort of the toxic, whether it's the soil, whether it's the water that's been polluted. In the case of Flint, Michigan, the pipes are literally killing folks. So these policy decisions have 2024 consequences.
From 100 and 150 years ago, like you said. Yep.
Yeah.
It's I was going to ask you, how do these issues intersect with the other issues that we care about? I mean, but you kind of talked about it. It's just a small. I mean, it's not small, but you're breathing in that stuff that you're building these houses on. You know what I mean? It's something that is so much overlooked because nobody really think that that's going on. You know what I mean? But the policyholders, and it's not just about the president, it's about everything else. I almost feel like he's the decoy. The president is always the decoy for the policyholders behind him, who's actually making the laws and making those decisions.
Yeah, but folks who are really into politics will tell you that all politics is local. And the reason that that's the case is because it's not necessarily the federal policy, although that is important. But what impacts people's day-to-day lives is local policy, right? It's what your city council, it's what your mayor, it's what your governor on a state level. Those kinds of policy decisions really hit people where they live. And so that is why we encourage engagement at the local level. We encourage people to go to their city council meetings. We encourage people to know who their city council person and their representative is, and to stay in their face about the issues that are impacting their day-to-day life. Because you're exactly right. The president is not necessarily the president is a decoy, because federal policy does matter as well. But really, if you want to impact how your day-to-day life unfolds, the path to that is engagement at the local political level.
So how do we get more people concerned about environmental issues, especially in our communities, that don't feel that it's their priority? And it's also, like you just said, like you just kind of spoke about the local, but sometimes I feel like this generation is they want to know more. You know what I mean? It's they're pushing to understand more, and sometimes I feel like there's a lot of pushback when it comes to the politicians, because they just kind of look at them as you're young, you don't know. You know what I mean? But the good thing about this generation, they'll push until something gets done. Again, how do you feel that we can get more people concerned about this?
I think the issue is not so much getting more people concerned, because I think people are already concerned. I think for what I'm seeing in the work that I do is that we need more folk like you who have platforms and podcasts and other, medium, to help folk make the connections between their lived experience and where those intersections are. So I would argue that for the most part, and this is not true across the board. I don't want your listeners coming for me. But if you solve for the climate crisis, you will solve for a lot of the other issues and challenges that we're experiencing in our communities, right? The things that we're passionate about. What we've lacked probably the last 30, 40 years is a cultural commentator or interpreter to help folk make those connections. So that, for example, there are countless studies that have been done that show a direct link between the level of tree canopy in a particular neighborhood and the crime rate, right? So the more trees, the lower the crime. And it's depending on, which neighborhood and, which geography you're talking about. If you increase tree canopy by 20%, you'll cut crime by 30%. And that's a direct link.
Wow.
There's a direct link between the number of trees and access to green spaces and parks and public health, whether it's respiratory disease like asthma or COPD, mental health. All of these, there are direct links between public health, between economic viability, between crime rates and tree canopy and parks and green spaces. And so the fact, it's not an accident that public policymakers intentionally decided not to invest in parks and green spaces in Black neighborhoods. That wasn't by accident. That was a calculated, intentional decision. And the consequences of that are far-reaching and widespread. But one of the challenges, again, that we have is having help folks make those connections so that they can understand that if we invest in green infrastructure, we will address so many challenges. And I think that's part of I think that's how we get folk engaged in a different way. Because I don't think that people aren't concerned. I think that the level of engagement maybe needs to shift. And it needs to shift because when you solve for climate, you'll solve for a lot of these other things.
I appreciate this conversation too, because just what you talked about, that's something that I didn't know about the tree canopy. You know what I mean? How just those little things, it's like a strategy for every little thing that is happening. And I think it's necessary because our communities, we're not taught about this stuff. We're not, obviously because it's strategic, but we don't, all we see out in front of us is the crime and everything like that. So all of that is just a direct action of what's happening behind the scenes too. Almost like the politics, like I said, with the local leaders and stuff. So how would you say, how can Black communities be leaders on these climate crisis issues?
I think part of it is engaging young people in a way that really takes seriously what they bring to the table in terms of energy and passion.
Yeah.
Before I was a senior pastor, I was a youth pastor for 12 years. And I feel like selfishly, one of the reasons I stayed in youth ministry so long is because young people kept me young, right? The energy and the fire and the passion that they bring to certain issues kept me young, right? And kept me engaged and kept me fired up. So I think that's part of it. And young people are already energized around climate anyway. And I think young people can be ambassadors and helping, other generations make those connection points and figure out the intersections. So I think that's part of it. The other part of it is, again, going back to the advocacy piece and in terms of leadership, is holding political leaders, but other leaders also, corporate leaders, accountable to just and equitable practices. So if you're a corporation, just and equitable business practices. If you're a politician, just and equitable policy and legislation, right? But we got to stay in full face, because otherwise they'll write us off. One of the things, and there's been a lot of criticism about the Biden and Harris administration, which I think some of it is a little bit misdirected. You can say what you want, though. Joe Biden stuck to promises that he made during the campaign, right? Joe Biden said he was going to select a Black woman to be his running mate, and he selected Kamala Harris. Joe Biden said that he was going to appoint a Black woman to the Supreme Court, first ever Black woman on the Supreme Court, in Judge Jackson. So when we hold politicians' feet to the fire, we will occasionally get some of the things that we've been promised. And so it really is dependent upon the leaders in our communities to know who the elected officials are, because we can complain about the political system all day long, and some of the complaints and the critiques are absolutely valid, but it is the system we got.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the challenges, right, that we face is because we get caught in this space between what we think ought to be and what actually is. And so if we can't deal with what is, we will never get to what ought to be if we can't confront the reality of what is. And so the political system, such as it is what we've got. And that is how policy is made. That is how legislation is passed. And those systems can be transformed. We've seen it as it relates to abolition. Slavery was legal, right? Until it wasn't.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Segregation was legal until it wasn't. And so some of the challenges we're facing now, in terms of legislation, those things, there are laws on the books, and those laws are valid until they're not, until they're challenged and overturned and new legislation is passed. So I think we got complacent somewhere after the civil rights movement and after Dr. King was assassinated. And I think, we breathed a collective sigh of relief because we got some voting rights legislation passed and some civil rights legislation passed, and the Fair Housing Act passed in 1968. And then we said, okay, well, we've arrived, but in reality, we have not arrived. Black home ownership rates in 2024 are either just the same level or slightly lower than they were before the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968.
And it's something. I mean, that just hearing those numbers like that sometimes for me is it's frustrating, because, like you said, these things are like this because these laws are valid because things aren't getting done. And back then it was, you got a couple passed and it's like, we did it, we made it, and it's like, no, that's not. We just stepped on the grass. That's all we did we just stepped on the grass. Now we got to go to the door. We got more ways to go. Now I want to talk about what you talked about earlier about your program that you're in. And was that you said that's down in Jacksonville?
So I wear a lot of hats, and you know, folks who do this kind of work often wear multiple hats. I sit on, you know, 2 or 3 nonprofit boards. I've got my own nonprofit that I run. I work with a friend of mine who pastors Metropolitan AME Church in DC. So I work for my day job. One of my day jobs is the senior program director for Metropolitan AME Church, working with the Smart Services Coalition. Smart Services Coalition is a group of about 40 different organizations from the public health space, from the policy space, from the research space, that are literally trying to get cities through policy to lower the temperature. Because here's another number that's going to frustrate you. In Black neighborhoods where they've made no investments in trees and parks and green spaces, the peak temperature during the summer is anywhere from 8 to 10 degrees hotter than it is in wealthy white neighborhoods with trees and parks.
Yep. And
right, so the exact same time of day, it's 8 degrees, 10 degrees. In Dallas, it's 20 degrees. Like the difference in temperature is 20 degrees in Black neighborhoods where there's no trees and no investment in green infrastructure, and wealthier white neighborhoods, right? That's a fact. And we've done experiments where you take a heat gun and you measure the ambient temperature, you measure the temperature on the ground, and it's 15, it's 10 degrees hotter. Go to the same neighborhood, you know, on the same time of day, go to a different neighborhood in the same city, and it's 10, 15 degrees cooler because they've got trees and parks and other green spaces. So we're working with policymakers in actually 10 cities across the country, from Portland up in the Pacific Northwest all the way to Boston, right? So it's almost like a circle or a half circle around the country, starting at Portland, coming down to Phoenix, through Texas, New Orleans, Jacksonville, Atlanta, Charlotte, Columbia, South Carolina, and Boston. And we're working with the city to adopt what we call an integrated suite of interventions that will lower the temperature. And it's everything from cool roofs to cool pavements to investments in trees and parks and green spaces and rain gardens and bioswales. All of those things, working with the city to adopt those those measures as a matter of public policy. And then on the other hand, so it's what we call a grass tops and grassroots approach. So grass tops, working with legislators, grassroots, working with community-based organizations and churches and nonprofits, and putting money in their hands and putting other resources in terms of capacity building and technical assistance to help them develop and implement what we call place-based in climate adaptation strategies. So, and it looks different in different places. Like in New Orleans and Jacksonville, those are coastal cities. And so they're dealing with a lot of vulnerability issues as it relates to stormwater and flooding. And I was just in New Orleans last week. The week before I got to New Orleans, it rained, and the neighborhood that I visited last week was completely flooded.
Wow.
Because 150 years ago, infrastructure decisions were made in New Orleans that create the conditions that anytime it rains, you get flooding, right? And it's not citywide flooding; it's flooding in the 7th Ward and the 9th Ward, which are wards that Black folk live in. Then there's similar issues in Jacksonville and some other places that are coastal. So we're working with folks on the ground, connecting them to the resources they need to continue and magnify the work that they've been doing for generations, right? Resilience and vulnerability issues in places like New Orleans didn't just happen. Didn't just happen during Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina exposed what had been happening, which was a vulnerability in New Orleans for over 100 years. Katrina exposed it. And, not surprisingly, there's still a lot of work to be done almost 20 years later. It's hard to believe that Katrina was almost 20 years ago. It was 2005.
It is something too.
There's a lot of work to be done. I was just in New Orleans last week working with some folks on the ground. The city of New Orleans, and it is what it is. They got money to build some parks, and 6 years ago, and they built 2 out of the 22 parks that they got money to build.
And that, you know what, and that's and you was you was right when you said them numbers are going to frustrate you, because it's I say it's frustrating because it's unnecessary. You know what I mean? But at the same time, it's just a strategic plan. So, like you said, what Katrina did was just expose that. And listening to what you said with the flooding, I live in Delaware, and in
another coastal state.
Yeah. Yep. So in the inner cities, which I grew up in, and now there's a bridge you cross, to go from one city to the next, and it's a small city. I mean, it's a small bridge. Delaware is small, but you go over the bridge when it rains.
Yeah.
I mean, and now gentrification is happening, so they fixed it. Yeah. Gentrification just happened a few years ago, so now that bridge, when it rains, you never even knew. Now they got the Sixers G League building right where it used to flood. I mean, it's huge, making money now. But saying that now just kind of leads me into my next question, because you recently wrote in the bnote.com about the way in which taxpayers keep flipping the bill for large sports stadium projects, and I thought that was so interesting of an article, because I mean, it was almost like you had like a deck of cards. You laid it out, and but these are things that they already knew.
Yeah. So here's the thing, and your audience, I'm sure, is very well informed, and they know a lot about what's happening. I'd be curious, and your listeners, if y'all know of any other example, then please let me know. But stadium financing is the only arena that I'm aware of where we would even tolerate or entertain the conversation of subsidizing a billionaire's desire. I don't know any other. So if I live in a neighborhood that has an HOA, and if my neighbor came to me and said, I'm going to move across town and I'm going to build a $10 million sprawling state-of-the-art estate, and I want you and the rest of the HOA to pay half.
I know that sounds crazy, but it happens.
It is crazy. It sounds crazy because it is crazy. I got no problem with my neighbor moving across town, building a $10 million sprawling state-of-the-art estate. Do you? But the minute you ask me to pay for it, and not just put something out, he ain't just asking me to put 5 on it. He said, I want you to go half on my mansion.
And I'm laughing because it
sounds effing crazy.
And that's the arrogance of it too. You know what I mean? It's like, are you crazy? But they are.
If your listeners, so let me pose another one. Your listeners, y'all go to work one day and your coworker says they're about to buy a brand new Bentley, and they want you to pay half. Then that would be bad enough. But this is why I think this whole stadium financing thing might be the greatest con in the history of sports. Because it's not bad, it's not insulting enough that you asked me to go half, right? But let's go back to the neighborhood. My neighbor building a sprawling $10 million state-of-the-art estate on the other side of town. Not only has he asked me and the HOA to fund half of it, but then every time I go over there for a cookout or a pool party, I got to pay for a ticket.
Yeah, and the park too.
And the park.
Oh man, you got me.
So this is the equivalent of what we in America, city after city after city, have done for the last 50 or so years. A billionaire comes and says, I want to build a new playground, and I want y'all to pay half or more, because most of the studies that I've done that look at this issue estimate that the average contribution, the average public contribution to stadium developments is about 70%. So we finance 70%, we put in 70, the billionaire puts in 30.
Yep.
Like, what are we doing?
Yep. And the way they get away with it is entertainment. Entertainment is it's the number 2 biggest business in the country.
Yeah, which gets back to, I think, what part of the reason why, going back to our earlier conversation, why we're so in love with symbolic gestures is because we're too busy entertaining ourselves instead of doing real work. But it's preposterous on its face, right? The fact that a billionaire is asking for and receiving public money to build their playground is preposterous in and of itself. So I think it's a con, and I don't understand why cities keep falling for it, other than the political will and the mythology that these projects create jobs and bring revenue growth and economic development. It's a lie.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't half of these stadiums, when they're getting built, I mean they're compromising bridges. A lot of these bridges and things are getting rerouted different ways. So these big buildings that, again, we're paying for, that people act like we have no say on things that are happening, are getting built, and they're closer to the inner cities, these stadiums.
Of course, but that just follows the legacy of the destruction of Black and brown communities since 1619 in this country. Right. So to get to your question, these stadiums often, all the things that you said, they disrupt existing infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
They oftentimes displace residential and other development. They're an eyesore. Initially they might look good, but in 10, 15, 20 years, they become an eyesore. And here's what's funny. The average lifespan of a quote unquote state-of-the-art stadium is about 20 years. And so they're looking to have their stadiums either upgraded or brand new in just 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm supposed to live in my house forever. Ain't nobody giving me a house upgrade in 20 years.
Nope.
But we're going to upgrade a billionaire stadium in 20 to 25 years, or they're going to threaten to pull out and leave the city.
Yep.
So I think that's the key, right? We have fallen in love with entertainment and have allowed owners to hold us hostage and to extort us into subsidizing their fantasies. So they'll threaten to leave, and we're like, no, please don't go. But there's no study that I've seen that supports any of the lies that these billionaires tell when they are pitching their stadium developments to the public or to the city. They don't create jobs.
No.
They just recycle revenue. So if there's no sports team, it's not like people in cities that don't have sports teams, it's not like they don't go out.
Mm.
They go out to eat. They go out to eat just like people in
Yep.
cities that have sports teams.
Mm-hmm.
They go to the movies, they go see shows, they go to the bars and the clubs. So they will continue to do that. If you build a stadium, all you're doing is taking revenue from one side of town and relocating it to where the stadium is. But that's not new revenue creation. All you've done is just giving people another entertainment option, but you're not creating new revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole thing is a lie. They say that public schools will be improved. And public schools in inner cities across the country are still chronically underfunded, right? They're losing teachers to private sector, losing them to charter schools, whatever the case. So none of the stuff that they promise and promote as benefits ever actually come to pass. And so taxpayers are left holding the bag and have absolutely nothing to show for it other than they get to say that this is the home of the Kansas City Chiefs or the Philadelphia Eagles or the New York Giants.
Yep.
So what?
I know it's and it's almost like this conversation is coming full circle, because when we started, I was saying, is it like, it's like they're living in the city and they can't. It feels so good to them. You know what I mean? It's almost like now, like you said, people are, what's going on with these stadiums, but because of this entertainment and because of this, it feels so good. It's like Sundays, I'm going to sit in front of the TV and I'm going to watch these games. I don't care what nobody says. Whatever they doing, that's what they do. No, it's not, because it's coming at, when you go to work and you complaining about them, all that stuff coming out of your paycheck, that's where it's going. That's who you should be arguing with. When you got these, when you got, your house bills and the community, thing you got to pay for every year in your neighborhood, all that stuff goes to that. So these are the things. It's like you're just choosing to not, to not see it. And it's, we need to do better. And this is why I think this conversation is so necessary, because, like I said, when I was reading through your bio and everything that you're doing, it shines light on that. And when when this does go out on YouTube and everything, I'm going to put that article on the in the description that people can read, because I think it's such an interesting read, and how you just, I almost could hear you talking as I was reading it. You know what I mean? And it was so simple, though. You know what I mean? It was so simple of just how you broke it down, because it is simple. Yeah.
I don't know that most people really think about the stadium, because the owners, league owners have tremendous PR machines, right? And the city doesn't necessarily, they want to bury any kind of tax, right? The city's not going to talk about increased taxes. They want to bury that as far as possible. And so most people, I don't think, understand how much collectively, and this is one of the things that, one of the studies I looked at, trying to answer the question of why we keep falling for the banana in the tailpipe as it relates to these stadiums. And part of it is because there's the amount of money per household is so small that it's not enough to motivate mass action, right? Mass protest, mass outrage. It's $1.25 per year per household.
Wow.
Which is not a lot of money, but if you're talking about a city with multiple millions of people,
That's
and a metropolitan area with multiple millions of people, that adds up, and it's it's a tax that you pay for the next 20 to 25 years. So the other piece, I think that folks, and one of the things I talked about in the article, is that there is a better way. It doesn't have to be publicly financed or publicly subsidized. So in Los Angeles, right, SoFi Stadium, which is where the Rams and the Chargers play, that stadium is 100% privately financed. So the two owners of those respective teams pay, like they finance that 100%. I think they split the cost 50-50. So the Chargers owner went half and the Rams owner went half, and they got the loan from the NFL, from NFL Inc. And so my thing is, if they did it, then everybody can do it. Yeah. Everybody should do it. Yeah. Or that should be the financing model going forward, especially if, and this is the part that, because one of the other things that we've fallen in love with in America is wealth and the appearance of wealth. Like, we put wealthy people on pedestals because in America we have bought the lie that your work ethic directly translates into wealth. Yep. Right. So we've made heroes out of people who are wealthy strictly because they're wealthy. We don't examine their character at all. They're pedestalized because they are wealthy. And so they can ask things that other people can't ask, that nobody would even have the audacity to ask. And you get it a lot of times because we have built a culture that rewards wealth strictly for wealth's sake.
Man, so what should we do instead of public financing these sports stadiums? Like, how?
Yeah,
I don't think we're going to be able to stop, but how could it be a win-win for both of us?
I don't. So the win-win is what happened with the Rams and the Chargers. Right. That's, to me, that's the only win-win.
Yeah.
And so what I would encourage your listeners to do, again, this gets back to, and this is again why I have an issue with, making days out of huge issues like Earth Day and Martin Luther King Day. These are huge issues that take, consistent engagement and involvement. Cannot be accomplished in a day. Your listeners probably are already engaged at the local political level. So what I would encourage them to do is to stay engaged at that level and to ask questions. The first question I would ask, anytime a ballot initiative is proposed or a tax is proposed that's going to fund a stadium, first question I would ask is, how can we afford this and we can't afford to fund our schools? How can we afford this, but we're making cuts to mental health resources? How can we afford this and we're cutting access to Medicaid and Medicare? So if we can't do those things, where are we getting $1 billion? Like Jacksonville, the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars right now is in negotiations, and really it's a strong arm tactic, but we call it negotiations, with the city of Jacksonville over, because he wants a new stadium. And he's asking the city to come up with $1 billion in taxpayer money. $1 billion with a B. And so if I'm in Jacksonville, I'm asking questions. Where are we going to find $1 billion if we can't fund our schools? So if we can do that, then we should be able to do this. And in my opinion, and in the opinion of people who live in these places, the priority should be schools and healthcare and mental health resources, not a new stadium for a team that has never. Jacksonville hadn't even sniffed the Super Bowl.
I was getting ready to say, when does Jacksonville? You asked Fred Taylor. They've
been in the playoffs a couple of times, have never even sniffed the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and you want $1 billion stadium, but that lets you know where they're not concerned about the public schools.
Yeah, the unmitigated gall and the audacity of it all is astounding. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make good sense. So I would encourage, to answer your question about what we can do is we can start asking those kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Why in the world are we going to reward a franchise that has never even delivered a championship? They ain't even won an AFC championship, let alone a Super Bowl championship. Why are we going to reward that with $1 billion subsidy?
I know. Yeah.
It makes no sense. At least the Tampa Bay Buccaneers won a Super Bowl.
They champions. Yeah, they champions.
The Miami Dolphins won a Super Bowl 50 years ago.
I know. I know. But Jacksonville want to be, they want to be. They want to be. I got one more question to you, but before I ask the question, I appreciate everything that everything that you do. This conversation was so enlightening for me. I'm sure it's going to be enlightening for everybody who watches. But the things that you're doing, I can say that I'm so appreciative that I met you, and then hopefully we can network and we can get the word out somewhere up here around Philadelphia and Jersey and all the surrounding areas, because we need people like you. God has done something for you, and he's placing you in the places, and you're doing exactly what he's asking you to do. So
I appreciate that.
It shows, and just continue to shine a light on these things. But final question, through everything that you've been through throughout your life as a child up to right now, what have you learned about yourself mentally and spiritually?
Whole other podcast. What I say is, and a lot of this has happened over the last few years as I pivoted. So I spent probably 20 years in parish ministry as a vocation. So I was a youth pastor, and then I was a senior pastor for close to 10 years, youth pastor for about 12 years. So a little over 20 years, actually. And pivoted coming out of the pandemic because I saw, well, first of all, I was blessed with an opportunity to connect what I believe is my calling to the climate crisis and an opportunity to really address it in a substantive way. As a pastor, one of the things that continuously frustrated me was that resources were available for this kind of work, but the hoops that a small church or a small nonprofit has to jump through to get access to the resources is crazy. So I was presented with an opportunity to be a grant maker to organizations like the church that I used to pastor, to small nonprofits. And what I've learned about myself in the process is that I really, at 52 years old, I'll be 53 this year. I've got fewer days in front of me in terms of active work than I do behind me, because I'm not going to be one of them people that dies behind my desk.
Yeah.
You're not going to have to pull my dead body up out of my chair.
Yeah.
I will be hopefully, dying somewhere on a beach, enjoying life with my wife. Right. Yeah. So I'm not going to do this forever, but I'm really passionate about it. And the urgency, I don't have time to play the kind of games we like to play.
Yep.
I just don't. And so this issue around the stadiums, I'm calling things for what they are in a way that I did not earlier in my career. And I think that all of that is tied to my spirituality, my sense of purpose, my sense of calling, my sense of vocation. The way that I read scripture is that God's ultimate concern with humanity is that we do justice. Right? What God said through the prophet Micah in Micah chapter 6, verse 8 is, what does the Lord require of you? It was a rhetorical question that the prophet posed to the people, but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Right? That is, for me, my mission and vision statement as an ordained clergy person, former pastor, environmental activist. That's my mission statement, is to do justice. And if we're not doing justice, then I'm not interested in it. And I'm calling it out and arranging resources, every resource I can bring to make sure that we are on a trajectory towards justice. Dr. King talked about the moral arc of the universe. It might be slow, but it bends towards justice. I agree with that only to the extent that people like Dr. King, people like you, people who are in our communities will force the arc to bend towards justice. Because it ain't gonna bend towards justice on its own.
Yep.
It needs to be forced because political interests are aligned against justice. Economic resources are aligned, capitalist resources are aligned against justice. So what I've learned is that justice does not just happen, justice has to be continuously pressed for. And however many days I got left doing this work, that's what I'll be doing. And I'm blessed to be able to do it in this capacity in this season. And thankful for the people that I've gotten to meet during doing this work. People in Jacksonville, people in New Orleans, people in San Antonio, people in Atlanta, and looking forward to getting more resources into the hands of people like the folks I'm working with in Jacksonville and New Orleans and Dallas and San Antonio, so that they can expand. And I'm really trying to blow up their work. I want them to be able to do whatever it is that they have the innovation and the creativity to do. So that's my mandate. That's my mission. And so that's what I've learned. That's a long answer, but I think that's what I've learned about myself and how I'm choosing to engage in not just Earth Day, but King Day, Juneteenth, all these celebrations we love to do for a day. I'm trying to orient my life so that my life is Juneteenth. So that my life is embodied as an embodiment of what King stood for and what King ultimately gave his life for. I think we tend to forget that King didn't just die surrounded by his family in a hospital bed.
No.
He was assassinated.
Yeah.
And he was assassinated because he was coming for the very things that America holds dear and will protect with violence. So I'm trying to live Earth Day. I'm trying to live Juneteenth, trying to live and embody the things that King was passionate about. And so I see that as my calling, see that as my purpose. And I'm fortunate to be able to do it as my vocation.
I was just getting ready to say you're living it. You know what I mean? And it's a testament to the things that you believe in and how hard you work. Because when you're doing stuff like this ain't people just think this ain't no cakewalk. They thinking you just going and talking to people. You're dealing with. This is a part of dealing with the spiritual world because we see it as the flesh, but you're dealing with because you have a different spirit on you and people's ideals and things that they believe in that may not fit with yours. Oh, they're gonna attack you now, and you got to be, you got to have the armor, and you wear the armor. So,
yeah. Thank you, I appreciate that, and what you said is absolutely right. Scripture tells us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities and spiritual forces in high places. And all of the stuff that we're talking about, the environmental, the legacy of environmental racism, the legacy of redlining, the legacy of racism and white supremacy, those are that's spiritual wickedness in the highest of high places.
Yep.
Right? And it has fleshly manifestations and consequences. But let's be clear that we're fighting a spiritual battle. And we need to arm ourselves with spiritual resources and fleshly resources, because folks in these communities that don't have parks, we can talk about all the spirituality we want. They need parks, they need green spaces, they need trees, they need infrastructure. So we need to bridge the spiritual with the temporal, and I think that is ultimately what Jesus's life and ministry represents, right? It's not just a theological exercise, not just a spiritual exercise, but Jesus was incarnate. God made flesh and dwelt among us to show us how we're supposed to do this thing. And so that's, I'm trying to do that. I'm nowhere near that, but I'm trying to do something a little
Yeah.
bit. If I get a little bit of it.
Yeah, we working. What they say, just press toward that mark. We press it toward that mark.
That's it.
It's
That's it.
I'm so thankful that I ran into you and was able to conversate with you because it's things like this. Just it sparks a little fire just to have you just to keep going. So Reverend Dr. Johnson Robinson, I'm gonna what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna talk with Raven, and we're going to continue because I do want to network with you and try to
Absolutely.
communicate and do some things up here, and I could be down there and do some things with you guys, and also I have a you might be interested in it, but I have a me and a Reverend we started a sports show, and it's called Faith in Sports, and what we do is we try to we talk about sports, but we try to bring the word into it, and we try to find different basketball players, football players, whatever it is, baseball players, and we talk with them on the show about you know their spirituality because a lot of times that gets lost into everything that goes on with the sports. So we try to you know do those things. So that would that's another thing that I would like for you to one day jump on the show. It could be a Zoom. You can jump on the show with us and we can talk about some sports and talk about the word too, which always is good. So
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
yeah, so I appreciate you for jumping on this podcast, and you again continue to keep doing what you're doing.
But do I appreciate it. Thank you for the invitation.
You're on YouTube, baby.